Wayne Homes Northwest Limited under Section 78 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 against the refusal by High Peak Borough Council of an application for full planning permission for residential development comprising 92 dwellings, including areas of public open space, landscaping and associated works at land to south of Dinting, Vale, Glossop. Can everyone hear me?
I can, thank you.
Thank you. I assume everyone know by now, but my name's Gareth Walgoots. I am a chartered town planner and planning inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this inquiry. This is day 6 of the inquiry and the 5th sitting day. Yesterday we heard from the final 2 witnesses from the appellant, together with a number of statements from local residents, all of which were subject to questions, as has been the usual process throughout the hearings, unless people have requested not to. Then we had the roundtable sessions on the planning obligations and the planning conditions. So today, the inquiry programme remaining is closing submissions. Now, the council did confirm yesterday that it isn't their intention to undertake closing submissions, so it will just be a closing submission from the appellant, and then we'll address any updates to the cost submissions that we've had so far. But before we move on to closing submissions, just a couple of housekeeping items. I have checked the inquiry website and I've noted that all of the documents up to IQ22 have been added, so I thank the council for doing that. The only document that I'm aware of that have been received since we adjourned yesterday evening is the written closings that I thank the appellant for providing in a timely manner this morning, and I'm happy to accept that as inquiry document 23, as long as provided there's no comments from any other parties at this point. If the council can just add the electronic version to the website, I presume the council's got a copy. If you can do so, just make it available as IQ 23. But obviously, for closing submissions, it's just a matter for the appellant to go through those closings and obviously not introduce new evidence at this particular point. Now, obviously, we did discuss procedural matters yesterday, and just for certainty, the fact that we're moving towards closing of the inquiry today doesn't mean that I've made up my mind. I made clear I wasn't making a decision on procedural matters at this particular point, and it doesn't preclude the possibility of reopening should it be necessary, nor does that imply that it will be necessary either, but that's just for certainty. Now, is there anything anyone else wants to raise at this particular point before we move into the closing submissions?
So we've had an email from Ms. Kane, one of the objectors. She had previously made submissions and she made another submission this morning, very early this morning, and which was received by me at 8:41 this morning. I have sent it to Mr. Brown at the inspectorate and also to the appellants. So I wasn't sure, sir, whether you were still accepting evidence or whether that window had closed.
The window had closed yesterday, but obviously the parties have seen it and I haven't at this particular point. So I can take advice from the parties whether you're happy to accept it or not at this particular stage.
So for my part, we are minded to suggest that the shutter has come down. Ms. Kane actually did appear at the inquiry on day 3, I'm instructed, gave evidence in relation to the matters that are contained in the letter, and there must come a point where you, sir, gave a very clear direction that there was a certain cut-off point and we must draw a line under the receipt of further and further documentation. So in my submission, I'd invite you to not take the letter into account. Obviously, Ms. Kane gave evidence and you'll have a note of what she said at an earlier point in the inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. The council, anything anything further on that point?
No, sir. We're happy to leave it in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in light of the representations, and given that I did give a clear deadline of 12 p.m. yesterday, in the interest of fairness for all parties as a cut-off for written submissions, and to allow any written submissions to be appropriately responded to in evidence, which we heard from the planning witness was picked up anything that was produced in time, and noting that the correspondents had the opportunity to present evidence at the inquiry previously. I agree. I think the correspondence should be returned to the correspondent because it's after the cut-off date that we've set yesterday.
We'll make arrangements for that to happen, sir.
Thank you. Anything further before we move into closing submissions?
No, sir.
Thank you. Well, in that case, I'd just like to invite the appellant to make his closing submission. I do have a copy before me, so I will be following along, Mr. Barrett's. But in your own time, it's 10:06.
Thank you very much, sir. I believe everybody will have now a copy of it. I begin with a brief introduction. The opening that I provided at the start of the inquiry is adopted without any further repetition. And following the withdrawal of the local planning authority's case, the public inquiry has appropriately proceeded to address the issues arising from the reasons for refusal in the decision notice, as local residents and objectors have adopted these matters as their own case against the development proposal. I then turn to that first issue, that of highway safety, and point out that there are two aspects of the case in respect of safety. Firstly, the access, and secondly, the effect or the potential effect of rat running at Adderley Place, Simonley Lane. Turning to that then first issue, the access, the evidence of Mr. Roberts has established that a number of matters were agreed with the Highway Authority: the base traffic flows for the busiest hours in 2021, the 2022 traffic speed survey, an accident survey noting the absence of accidents, and the sustainable location of the site. In short, between the appellants, the local planning authority and the highway authority, there are no issues in terms of safety or capacity of the highway network. At the busiest time of the day, the development traffic would average just one vehicle every 2 minutes in the morning and evening peak hours. Consideration has also been given to any impact of the Mottram bypass. The effect will be that the peak hour journey times between Glossop and the M67 will benefit from a considerable journey time saving, and the effect of this will increase traffic in the study area on the same roads. However, any increase in traffic will be more than offset by the improvements to journey times. The position of the access then, policy DS4 of the local plan notes that substantial access improvements onto the A57 will be required. The access to serve the site was specifically considered by the examining inspector, and the evidence of Mr. Roberts establishes that the appellant has slightly extended the development shown on the proposal's map to achieve standards of the County Council Highway Authority. Indeed, the visibility displays are more generous than would be required. Mr. Roberts points out that the development will provide a display in accordance with manual for streets, that is 2.5 meters, 2.4 meters, I beg your pardon, by 43 meters, in circumstances where the speed survey data would have permitted a reduction in the extent of the display required. A principal concern of many local residents is the proximity of the school to the access. This was also dealt with in the evidence of Mr. Roberts. Firstly, the proximity of houses and schools is a locational sustainability advantage or benefit. Secondly, whilst congestion typically occurs at any school at drop-off or end of school day, it will only typically be some 20 minutes or so. Thirdly, the junction has been demonstrated to the Highway Authority to meet all safety and capacity considerations, and the officer's report to Planning Committee dealt with this in some detail and concluded that the proposals were acceptable. Turn then to the second aspect of highway safety, the rat run. Members of the planning committee were informed that this particular issue could be dealt with by a condition. Following the refusal, the appellant devised a scheme that would have been brought forward in order to discharge such a condition. Appendix 1 to the evidence of Mr. Roberts meets the required dual objective of allowing existing residents at Adderley Place to access their properties to and from Simondley Lane, and also prevent vehicles from the development being able to turn into and out of the eastern section of Adderley Place. The scheme is a clear enough demonstration that what members were informed was correct, namely that the matter could be dealt with by way of a condition. I then turn to the access. Mr. Nicholas addressed this issue in his evidence. This specifically addressed the access gradient. The access to serve the allocation was, as we've noted already, to be from the A57, and Inspector Moore, in the report of the examination in public, had stated, quote, the issue was creating a new access to the site from the A57 and the additional traffic. The evidence does not indicate that these matters are insurmountable. End quote. As such, the principle of residential development and the access to serve that development is established as being from the A57, as shown on the proposals map. Mr. Nicholas then points out that if a 1 in 20 gradient from the A57 was to be provided, this would be too low to meet the existing vehicular access and indeed be below the private gas main, where cover needs to be maintained at 1.2 meters. In addition, the 1 in 20 gradient would require a large retaining structure and a greater impact on trees at the location of the junction. The solution provided is for a gradient of 1 in 30 for 10 meters from the A57 junction and a 1 in 10 gradient over 156 meters. Importantly, no access is to be taken over this length. It was pointed out in documentation provided to the Highway Authority that there were recent precedents of this gradient having been approved, including for adoption. It is the evidence of Mr. Nicholas that this is the best that can be realistically achieved, consistent with the allocation in the local plan. In terms of accessibility for pedestrian cyclists, this is the subject matter of a technical note provided to the Highway Authority. A circuitous route could be provided for pedestrian cyclists, but would produce an unacceptable impact on the tree cover at the northern part of the site. The gradient provided to serve the site would be 5 to 10%. The position has to be contextualised in the context of Glossop. There are many footways off the A57 that exceed the guidance figure of 2.5% that function well. In addition, the site users have the benefit of the public footpath connection of the site to Simondley Lane, which is readily available. There would be a further benefit associated with the provision of the facility proposed in this appeal, as the access would be lit. In addressing the needs of future users, 3 level seating areas are also to be provided. Then turn to the next main issue, that of air quality. This was the subject of the evidence of Ms. Whittall. After the original air quality report was submitted, the local authority asked for the effect of the A57 Mottram bypass to be assessed. The additional report is CD 210, and the appellant was thereafter requested to provide the assessment methodology that was then supplied to the LPA. The officer's report dealt with this issue comprehensively. It will be seen from the update for the meeting of the 22nd April 2024 that this shows, in my submission very clearly, that the Environmental Health Officer conscientiously assessed the proposal. The analysis of the appellant and accepted by the Environmental Health Officer was that the effect of the emissions on existing human receptors, including those within the AQMA, was predicted to be not significant and be below the relevant AQO objectives, the air quality objectives, at all locations. A concern was that whilst the local plan was adopted in 2016, the AQMA was declared more recently in 2019. However, it will have been noted that a review of the local plan policies had concluded that policies were not regarded as up to date. A couple of policies were, but policy DS4 remained unaltered. The AQA, on behalf of the appellant, complied with the Environmental Protection UK guidance, and the approach had been agreed with the local planning authority beforehand. The pollutants considered were nitrogen dioxide, PM10s and PM2.5s. The assessment demonstrated that the projected annual mean concentrations would be below government prescribed objectives, with the development fully occupied. Ms. Whitall explained that the objectives are themselves health-based benchmarks that included consideration of the young, those with respiratory conditions and the elderly. Based on the magnitude of change in the concentrations, they were properly described as negligible at all receptor locations, including that at Dinting Primary School. CD 210 demonstrated that the appeal proposals had been considered with and without the Mottram bypass. Furthermore, there is an element of conservatism as the assessment was based on 111 residential units and not the 92, which is the subject matter of this appeal. The measured pollutant levels post-declaration of the AQMA are shown on Table 1. These demonstrate that in the last 3 years, the readings are all below the threshold of 40 micrograms per cubic meter for nitrogen dioxide. The measurements here are consistent with the DEFRA data that shows pollutant concentrations falling. The position can be concluded that when the development is completed and fully occupied, the levels within the AQMA will be well below the government benchmark. Specifically, this is seen from Table 1 of the evidence of Ms. Whitall, diffusion tube HP21 that is located at the primary school also shows that position. It shows exceedances in 2017-18, but at levels now well below at 40 micrograms per cubic meter. It should be noted that the computer modelling is robust. It is a detailed model used throughout the industry that emulates the effect of traffic, including reduced vehicle speeds at congestion, variation of traffic throughout the day, and increased traffic in the opening year of development. Further mitigation measures are proposed, although strictly speaking, these would not meet the test of necessity in view of the evidence provided. The assessment shows the impact on receptors is not significant, but nevertheless, the appellant is proposing mitigation to improve the take-up of non-polluting transport modes, including the travel plan, and a contribution of £150 per dwelling to enable real-time monitoring of pollutants. Then turn to arboriculture. As previously set out, the allocation DS4 in the local plan requires access from the A57. In considering this issue, it was inevitably the case that both the local planning authority as promoters of the local plan and its allocations contributing to meeting housing need, and the examining inspector would have been aware of the presence of trees on the appeal site and the council-owned site adjoining it. During the consideration of the application, the tree officer of the local planning authority made a TPO in respect to the site. This was the subject matter of some trenchant objections on behalf of the appellant. It was considered that the TPO did not follow government guidance. It did not address how the amenity value was assessed that would take into account visibility, impact and the wider impact, and included a number of trees of low quality. It would seem that little progress has been made towards confirming the TPO since the initial making of it and receipt of the appellant's objections. Mr. Tavendale, in his evidence, notes that the order also covers the upper sections of the site, where in fact no tree material exists, resulting in the order being, in his words, misleading. Whilst the quality of trees and their presence are undoubtedly material considerations, whether or not protected by a TPO, the wider arboricultural issues have not really been grappled with on behalf of the local planning authority. The application was accompanied by an arboricultural impact assessment that addressed tree canopy rather than individual trees. The total area loss is very nearly 1 hectare. The proposed development would result in tree replacement at a rate of 101% by canopy. This is on site, sir, after 25 years. That should be, would you insert 25 there? That was the provision on site. The rationale for the 2-to-1 replacement ratio was the expectation of failure of the replacement trees. Mr. Tavendale, in his rebuttal evidence, would expect a success rate in excess of 90%, and with the requirement for replacement via condition, the success rate would even be greater. The upshot of the recommendation to Planning Committee was that approval should be granted. This was in the context of policy EQ9, and that what was proposed was a 1-for-1 replacement on site and a contribution of £72,400 and very nearly £20,000 for maintenance for off-site provision. It will be recalled that policy EQ9 is qualified to the extent that application of it is where appropriate and where possible. It is not expressed in absolute terms. I turn then to ecology. There was a biodiversity element embedded within reason for refusal 3, which was dealt with in the evidence of Miss Kerr. Policy EQ5 of the local plan was intended to prevent direct or indirect subsequent harm to biodiversity conservation interests unless demonstrated that appropriate conservation and mitigation measures are provided to ensure, as a minimum, no net loss. A comprehensive baseline of environmental data was collected and submitted as part of the proposal. A biodiversity net gain strategy was provided at Appendix 2 of the appellant's statement of case. In brief, the evidence demonstrates that there will be an enhancement to biodiversity conservation interests. This is agreed with the environmental consultants on behalf of the local planning authority, that is the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. Those measures include a retention of a 30-metre strip along the western boundary to buffer the woodland edge, relaxed mowing schedule, inclusion of specific flora that favour the large garden bumblebee and other invertebrates, 3 sustainable urban drainage systems, phased vegetation clearance and pre-work inspections, the provision of bat and bird boxes in the layout to support species, including the tawny owl, starling, house martins and bats, and the production of a sensitive lighting strategy, together with bat-friendly planting to retain foraging habitat. A key consideration was the direct loss to the grassland mosaic, including that to 2 priority habitats. The bespoke compensation by way of translocation of the grassland habitat to an off-site receptor site that was identified at Chinley. The Chinley site is within the administrative area of the local planning authority. Specific fauna have been the subject matter of some discussion at the public inquiry, and I'll deal with that briefly. In terms of badgers, this was the subject matter of a bespoke survey. This establishes that there are no badger sets present on the appeal side, although there is evidence of badger activity. In terms of deer, whilst not a protected species, there is nothing in the proposal that would materially impact upon them. And in terms of the garden bumblebee, the survey found only one present on site. Nevertheless, the mitigation provides planting that favour large bumblebees and other invertebrates. Deal with BNG. In the context of biodiversity net gain, the appeal proposals are not in fact subject to the mandatory requirement under the Environment Act 2021. The policy framework, consistent with policy EQ5 of the local plan, requires there to be, as a minimum, no net loss. In the event, the appeal proposals achieve a biodiversity net gain of 11%. This is achieved by on and off-site provision and the securing of just over 18 credits through the Habitat Bank to satisfy BNG trading rules. There would also be a 447% increase in hedgerow units and a 16% increase in watercourse units. In addition, the BNG calculations take no account for the replacement trees being planted by the council by the off-site contribution of that £72,400 plus maintenance that will have a further biodiversity benefits for the local area. It will be noted that the conclusion of Ms. Kerr is that by implementing the proposed landscape design, the BNG strategy, the 30-year management plan and pre-construction inspections, the impacts upon faunal features are avoided or suitably mitigated, consistent with statutory and policy requirements. Then turn to viability. The issue of viability becomes relevant in the context of the failure to provide a policy level compliant level of affordable housing or a SIL contribution. The original viability assessment was updated to analyse the situation in respect of the appeal proposal consisting of some 92 houses. The LPA sought the expertise of outside consultants, Bruton Knowles and quantity surveyors Townsend and Rondon. Their advice to the council concluded that there would be a surplus available for 100 section 106 contributions. So can I ask you to correct that figure? The figure should actually be £793,000, 793,000. So that's consistent then with the statement of common ground, paragraph 26.
Thank you.
So I'll read that again.
I've corrected it. 7,900. 793,000 I've now got in hard copy in front of me.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, whilst that was a matter not agreed by Mr. Heathcote, the appellants were minded to agree that with a view to making progress with the local determination of the appeal application. It will be noted that at no time did the consultants on behalf of the local planning authority regard the viability submission as unacceptable or inappropriate, and in particular at no point did they seek a viability appraisal of the total allocation in the local plan to be assessed. The issue that arose in the context of the current appeal was that at the point of the local planning authority's statement of case, the argument was that the viability assessment ought to have included the land owned by the council with a view to establishing that the additional houses could make a contribution to affordable housing provision. Some reliance was placed on the 2014 local plan viability test report. That whilst that document was recognised to be fit for purpose, for the purposes of the local planning examination, it simply suffered from a number of particular problems. Firstly, it was a product of its time. It was pre-Brexit, pre-COVID, pre-Ukrainian war, pre-BNG statutory requirements, and the up-to-date circumstances surrounding the financial and building construction market. And secondly, a viability assessment to support a planning application draws on the particulars and detail of the planning permission sought and is able to deal with considerable detail that is then available, such as the house types, the build costs, interest rates then prevailing, topography, comparable sales, etc. Notwithstanding the considerable concerns over the utility of such an exercise and the ability to do so compliant with planning policy guidance, that was done nevertheless in the evidence of Mr. Heathcote. The evidence that was presented to address the local planning authority viability case derived from the statement of case and presented the best evidence that was available of the likely viability of the whole of the allocation DS4. That evidence was considered by the local planning authority and the same viability consultants retained to assess the earlier viability assessment. Inquiry document 4, that is ID 4, acknowledges that the viability consultants retained by the local planning authority did not seek to qualify or criticise the exercise conducted by Mr. Heathcote, with the conclusion that the viability of the whole of the allocation DS4 could not be regarded as providing opportunities to make contributions to affordable housing or other SIL contributions. Then turn to the planning and planning balance. And Mr. Hourigan addresses this comprehensively in his evidence. The plan-led approach in national policy and legislation gives a special status to the allocation of the site for residential purposes in an adopted local plan. that establishes the principle of development in this case. The application of section 38 subsection 6 of the 2004 Act inevitably means that a determination in accordance with the provisions of the statutory development plan requires the approval of the application unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Full weight should be given to the local plan. As indicated earlier, there was a review in 2022 that concluded, while some policies were not entirely consistent with up-to-date versions of the framework, no criticism was levelled at the allocation of DS4. In this particular case, a full suite of documentation in support of the application had been provided and subject to quite rigorous examination by the local planning authorities, professional officers, statutory consultees and their outside consultants. The conclusion was a very clear recommendation to approve the proposal to members of the Planning Committee. And whilst it is recognised that members of the Planning Committee are not obliged to adopt the recommendations contained within the committee report, they must nevertheless determine the application on an appropriate evidential basis, consistent with the statutory duty placed upon them. Those issues that are material to the determination of the application have been fully ventilated and examined during the course of the public inquiry. The effect of the proposed development are positive, and any identified harm is fully mitigated and addressed. And it is submitted that, having regard to the fact that the site is allocated and appropriate issues have been addressed in the course of the application, paragraph 11C of the framework is engaged, and that the development proposal should be approved without delay. In addressing other material considerations, they in our submission add to the grant of a planning permission rather than indicating otherwise. They include the delivery of 92 market dwellings in accordance with the plan-led proposal, delivery of a high-quality housing development with a range of house types that will be attractive to a broad section of the community, delivery of a sustainably located housing development that also provides energy-efficient homes built to exceed current building regulation standards. A travel plan will encourage the uptake of sustainable modes of transport, and the layout has been designed to encourage cycling and walking. Securing access to that part of the allocation in the council's ownership, delivery of a policy and statutory level of BNG. There will also be significant off-site tree planting secured through the planning obligation that will provide biodiversity benefits in excess of the 11% provided. Economic benefits associated with the construction phase of the development, and thereafter additional expenditure supporting local shops, services and facilities once occupied. And finally, there will be an arboricultural benefit associated with the active management of the retained trees on the site, together with new planting as proposed off-site. And so in all those circumstances, my conclusion is that you are accordingly invited to allow the appeal. And so unless I can assist you further, those are my closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Just to confirm that there were just two updates. I think there was a missing year that I've corrected on the version, and the correction of the figure. And I'll make sure that I'll make a note of that on my electronic version as well, just to make sure that the accurate figures are given.
Thank you very much, sir. I am also I received a communication from a learning friend, and there is one correction I need to make to my reply to his costs application. I don't know if you. So I think I've indicated earlier, and my learned friend did, that we were entirely content that you take away the written costs application, the council's reply and my response to that. But in responding to the council's case, my footnote 7 reference.
Yes, I'll just get it up,
pull it up, sir, yeah.
Yeah, so footnote 7, yes.
My footnote 7, I think, references my learned friend's reply to the cost application. So yes. Will you change the reference?
Yes.
To from that to CD 3.1, where members were told that it could be dealt with by condition, and yep. Cross-reference my closing paragraphs 10 and 12, where I dealt with it.
You said 10 and 12 then? Sorry.
Yeah, 10 and 12 of my closing, where I'm saying you may recall that members were told that this matter could be dealt with by condition.
Yes.
And in the event, we demonstrated how what they were told was actually correct.
Thank you. I've made those updates on my version, so for completeness, that'll be the version that I refer to when I'm considering the cost application. I do agree. I do agree with the parties that I've had the written cost application, the council's response, and your final comments for a considerable period of time, as have the parties. So I'm happy to take them, and having considered them, they don't need to be read out. I thank you for those oral updates. I'm assuming there's nothing to add from either party at this particular point on the cost application. Are they happy for me to take it away and to determine it in due course?
Happy for you to take it away and determine it in due course, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any final remarks, Mr. Bruin? Mr. Bruin?
No, not from the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final remarks, Mr. Barrett?
Not from me, sir. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, I thank you all for your contributions to the discussions and during the inquiry. The inquiry is now closed. It's 10:36. I thank you. I thank you all for your time, and the decision will be issued in due course. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Hi, Ben.